Now, this is very interesting because in the Gospel of John, in chapter 20, verse 17, Jesus says, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. Jesus is referring to God as his God. That's very interesting. The other quotation in the Quran that is of relevance, it says, and the blessed Jesus said, O children of Israel, worship God. Again, my Lord and your Lord, for whosoever joins others with God, meaning in his exclusive divine attributes, God will forbid paradise to him, and for the wrongdoer, meaning in the day of judgment, there will be no helpers. This is quoted on the tongue of Jesus according to the Quran. 11th, like many other prophets before him, Jesus was rejected, just as Abraham was rejected, as Noah was rejected, as Muhammad and Moses were both rejected by their people in some way or the other. That's not surprising. Anyone who speaks the truth is surrounded by those who have their own vested interests and agendas that they do not wish the truth to emerge and for people to listen to it. The Quran speaks freely about that. In fact, the Quran goes again into an area where Muslims and Christians agree that not only was Jesus rejected, but that there was a conspiracy to crucify him. Up to that point, there is agreement. The Quran says Allah or God raised him unto himself. I believe there is agreement on that point in both the New Testament and the Quran. There is one difference, however, in a statement in the Quran that has been subjected to a whole range of interpretation. And that verse in chapter 4 says, but they killed him not, nor did they crucify him, but it so appeared to them, or it could translate, it was made to appear to them. It so appeared, but it's not reality. There have been a variety of interpretation, but I must make it clear. There is a big difference between the exact text of the Quran in the original language in which it was revealed, which is already in our hands today, and the commentaries and interpretations of Muslim scholars or commentators on the Quran. Unfortunately, I see some people quoting opinions of commentators as if it is the text of the Quran. No, they could be right, they could be wrong. That's why some interpretations said that God threw the likeness of Jesus on the face of Judas the Iscariot who betrayed him, and it was Judas actually who was crucified in his place because he appeared in speech and shape everything like Jesus. That's one. It's an opinion. Others said that they arrested another man and put him in his place. That's an opinion. It could be right or wrong. However, I must bring to your attention two things. One, a minority opinion held by a scholar, a Muslim scholar, Dr. Mahmoud Ayyub, who teaches in Philadelphia, in Temple University, that he referred to verses in the Quran that speak about killing and so on. And he concluded, in his opinion, that it is possible that Jesus was crucified, and when the Quran say they did not kill him or crucify him, mean not with their own will, but it was the will of God that this happens. Again, I'm not taking sides, but I'm simply saying that there's a whole range of interpretation of a text that is, is very rather ambiguous and can be interpreted in more than one way. But the most important point that I'd like to say, that theologically speaking, it would not make the slightest difference for a Muslim. I do realize and I respect the fact that there are many Christians who believe that the 3 days, the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of the faith rather than what Jesus said all the time. Fine, I respect the right to believe in this. However, from a Muslim perspective, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever, even if Jesus was crucified. This is not argued. Even if it didn't. For a Muslim, it doesn't mean anything. Many great prophets in the past were killed by their people. In the time of Jesus, John the Baptist was killed and his head was, cut off. I mean, the idea of killing a prophet is not indignity to the prophet. It is indignity to the killers. He is a martyr for the sake of the message that he carried. Number 12. We believe on the authority of the Quran, and I can see parallels in the Bible as well, but again, time doesn't allow for this. But the Quran states, which for me is the authority, that Jesus spoke about a prophetic figure to come after him and gave his name, in fact, as Ahmad, which is another name of Muhammad, peace be upon him. You find that in chapter 61, verse 6. 13, finally. Even though the Quran does not mention that explicitly, there is one verse in the Quran that may be interpreted in the line of a number of other sayings of the Prophet, that Jesus the Blessed will come to earth again when the Mahdi, or the guided one, will be leading Muslims against the false Messiah, that he will join forces with Muslims, and that's the time when full unity between Muslims and Christians can be achieved, because they will hear it from the horse's mouth that he is none but a servant, a humble servant of God, as he described himself even in the New Testament, in which case there will be peace on earth, which we all look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Rittenhouse will have 15 minutes.
Jamal, thank you. I appreciate your comments. I would not propose to have a great knowledge of the Quran, and I would always defer to your knowledge of it. My knowledge base is not with the Quran, but my knowledge base is with the New Testament. I've spent 35 years studying it in the original language. I do claim to know something about it. There's much to agree with what you've said, but there's also some things to disagree with. So I developed one of my 2 points to the issues that I've mentioned. One was the Christian scriptures. It's seen as unreliable by Muslims on many occasions. The second thing I mentioned was, who is the best source of information concerning the identity of Jesus? Who should we trust more for information? Should we trust those that spent 24 hours a day with him for 3 years? Or somebody 600 years removed from his life? Should we trust the disciples who Jesus walked and lived with, or a man who lived 6 centuries after Jesus finished his ministry? The disciples lived, walked, and talked with Jesus 24/7 for over 3 years. While in sharp contrast, Muhammad never met nor talked with Jesus. So who's the best source of information about Jesus? Muhammad or his disciples, Jesus' disciples? I think the answer is obvious. So since the disciples are far more accurate source of information concerning Jesus, let us listen to their voices in the pages of the New Testament. Let them tell us who this man Jesus is, since they walked with him for 3 years. The Apostle Paul, who wrote 25% of the New Testament, in Colossians 2:9 declares, "For in him," speaking about Jesus, "all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form." Many of his disciples affirmed, proclaimed, and died for the claim that Jesus was in fact God. Jesus, after his crucifixion and resurrection, one of his disciples, Thomas, I love Thomas. He's a 20th century postmodern person. Thomas is the doubter. Unless I see the proof, baby, I ain't doing it, man. I ain't signing up for this gig, because a lot is on the line, a lot is at stake, and I'm not going to believe it until I see him with my own eyes. I want to put my hands into his side. I want to feel the nail prints in his hands. I ain't going to believe until I see positive, verifiable, empirical evidence, baby. So Jesus shows up on the scene and says, "Thomas, go ahead and put your hands here in my side. Check it out, buddy. I'm not a ghost. I'm not a spirit, because a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And Thomas said in response, "My Lord and my God." That's pretty clear. John, in his gospel, "In the beginning was the Word," or Logos, "and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." There's no indefinite article in the Greek language. There is no a in the Greek language. There's only definite articles, the. And in this text, I don't have time to develop it, but it is unbelievably precise in referring to the Word, which is Jesus, who dwelt among us, became flesh and dwelt among us. It is absolutely indisputable that it's communicating that he is God from the text.